Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi Mesechet Challah. We are up to Perek Gimel Mishnah Tet. Today's Mishnah should be Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Aranbayev and Eliyahu ben Burchai Israelov Menuchatam Began Eden Amen. Now that we discussed how the law of Challah applies to a dough partly containing tevel, the Mishnah now is going to discuss a similar situation with regards to the laws of Terumot and Maasot. We know that the Torah requires that certain tithes be separated from produce. These are as follows: Terumah Gedula, which is given to a Kohen. Midoraita, there's no minimum amount that must be given to as Terumah, but the rabbi said a minimum amount, usually 1/50th of the produce. Then we have Maaser Rishon, 1/10 of the remaining produce, which is given to a Levi. Then we have Terumat Maaser, 1/10 of Maaser Rishon, which the Levi separates and gives to a Kohen. And then we have Maaser Sheni or Maaser Ani, depending on the cycle. Maaser Sheni is 1/10 of the crop remaining after Terumah and Maaser Rishon were separated. You would separate it from crops of the first, second, fourth, and fifth year of the 7-year Shemitah cycle in Yerushalayim. And if it was year 3 or 6 of the Shemitah cycle, instead of giving Maaser Sheni, we would give Maaser Ani, the tithe of the poor, which was 1/10 of the crop separated instead of Maaser Sheni, and given to the poor. And we know Terumat Maaser may not be eaten by non-Kohen. Maaser Rishon and Maaser Ani may be eaten by all. The only reason why these portions cannot be eaten by someone other than a Levi or poor person is because if he does so, he's stealing from the Leviim and the poor people to whom the Torah awarded this item. However, the Levi or poor person may give it or sell it to whoever he wishes, and the one who receives it may eat it. So again, Terumat Maaser are only for Kohanim. A non-Kohen may not eat it, but Maaser Rishon and Maaser Ani, although they are awarded to a Levi or a poor person, they have the right to give it or sell it to whoever they want, and it can be eaten by whoever receives it. Now, as a rule, the laws of Terumot and Maasrot do not apply to gifts that the Torah awards to the poor. The Mishnah now discusses a case where such gifts became mixed with other produce that's subject to Maasrot. Similarly, with regards to the harvested olives, meaning regular olives that are tevel, that became mixed with picked olives that must be left as gifts to be picked by the poor and are not subject to Maasrot. And the Mefarshim explain, harvested olives are olives that the farmer harvests for himself and therefore subject to Maasrot. Picked olives are those olives that he's required to leave on the tree for the poor, which is namely Shicha and Pe'ah, and picked olives would be exempt from Maasrot. Or Inve Batsir Iminve Orelot, harvested grapes that are tevel that became mixed with olot grapes. Olot grapes are grapes that are left as gifts for the poor and not subject to Maasrot. We learned in Mesechet Pe'ah, chapter 7, Mishnah 4, Orelot are clusters of grapes that have not developed normally. The Torah awards Orelot to the poor, and they too are also exempt from Maasrot. So he can do as follows in order to permit the mixture. Again, it means another batch. If he has another batch of tevel of the same type of produce that he can bring from somewhere else, because we know separating Maasrot from one species for another is invalid, and therefore the other tevel produce must be the same species as the mixture. We learned this in Mesechet Terumot, chapter 2, Mishnah 4. So again, if he has a batch of tevel of the same type of produce that he can bring from somewhere else, he may separate an amount of Maasrot for that batch of tevel in proportion to the amount of tevel in the mixture. But if he does not have another batch of tevel from which to separate Maasrot for the tevel in the mixture, he must separate the amount of Terumah and Terumat Maaser necessary for the entire mixture and give those portions to the Kohen. And the Mefarshim explain, first he separates Terumah Gedolah, then he separates 1/10 as Maaser Rishon, which must be separated before Terumat Maaser. Afterwards, he separates 1/10 of the Maaser Rishon as Terumat Maaser and gives the Terumah Gedolah and Terumat Maaser to a Kohen. Now, although the Mefarshim explain, although the Mishnah says he must separate Terumah and Terumat Maaser for the mixture, it does not mean that the other Maasrot don't have to be designated for the entire mixture, because in actuality, other Maasrot must also be designated for the entire mixture, but only part of those Maasrot is treated as Maaser. The portion separated as Terumah and Terumat Maaser, on the other hand, must be treated entirely as Terumah and given in their entirety to the Kohen. V'ashar Maaser or Maaser Sheni lefi cheshbon. The Mishnah continues, and for the remaining Maasrot of Maaser Rishon and Maaser Sheni or Maaser Ani when applicable, the amount of fruit he treats as Maaser is in proportion to the amount of tevel in the olives or grape mixture as with teruma, he must designate an amount of maasrot that is sufficient for the entire mixture. But unlike teruma, he's not obligated to give all the fruits he designated as maaser rishon to a Levi, or give the entire maaser to the poor. Nor is he required to redeem the entire maaser sheni. Rather, he gives or redeems only the amount of maaser that corresponds to the amount of tevel in the mixture. And Voshim explained, for example, let's say the mixture contains 600 tevel fruits and 400 chulin fruits, meaning fruits that he must leave for the poor, which are not subject to maasrot. When maaser rishon is being separated, the owner must separate 10% of the entire 1,000 fruit mixture, which is 100 fruits, as maaser rishon. But nevertheless, since only 600 fruits in the mixture are tevel, he gives the Levi only 60 of those fruits. And similarly, when separating maaser ani or maaser sheni from the remaining 900 fruits, he separates 90 fruits, which he designates as maaser ani or maaser sheni. But since only 60% of the fruits, 540 fruits, are tevel, he needs to take only 54 of those 90 fruits and give them to the poor of the maaser ani, or redeem them if they're maaser sheni, and he may keep the rest for himself. The portions designated as teruma and terumat maaser, however, must be given in their entirety to a kohen, and the difference is as follows. Teruma and terumat maaser, besides for belonging to the kohanim, are forbidden to non-kohanim. So the owner now has the following situation. He owes the kohen only the terumat maaser fruits that are in the mixture that he separated, which in our case makes up 60% of the mixture. But if he gives the kohen only 60% of the mixture, which is the percentage we assume to be teruma, many of the fruits he gives to the kohen will likely be chulin, and many of the fruits that remain in his possession will likely be teruma and forbidden to a non-kohen. So his only solution is to give all of the fruits separate to a kohen. And as for the chulin fruits, which are 40% of the fruits that he gives to the kohen, to which the kohen is not entitled, he can request payment for them from the kohen. Maaser rishon, on the other hand, is not forbidden to non-Leviim, and therefore the owner may simply give the Levi 60 fruits, which is the amount to which the Levi is entitled. The fact that many of the fruits that he gives to the Levi will be chulin, and many of the fruits that remain in his possession will be maaser, doesn't present a problem, because since he has given the Levi the amount of fruit to which the Levi is entitled, he may keep and eat the rest, and the same reasoning applies to maaser ani. By giving the poor the amount of fruit to which they are entitled, he fulfilled his obligation. Regarding maaser sheni, he fulfilled his obligation by redeeming the fruit that required to be tithed, even if he cannot identify him. And the reason for this is because it is never necessary to identify the maaser sheni fruits in order to redeem them. One can simply make a declaration wherever the fruits that are maaser sheni are located, they're redeemed with this redemption money. And that is the Rabotai of Mishnah Tet. Mishnah Yud, now the final Mishnah of this chapter, discusses another case in which a person mixed a dough of tevel, which is a dough subject to Challah, from which Challah has not been separated, into dough that is not subject to Challah. Hanotel seor mi'isat chitim, v'notel letoch isat ores. If someone takes a piece of sourdough from a wheat dough of tevel and places it into a rice dough, which is not subject to Challah, like we said in chapter 1, Mishnah 1, only from the 5 species of grain it's obligated in Challah: wheat, barley, spelt, oats, and rye. The halacha is as follows: Im yesh ba tam dagan, if the flavor of the wheat grain can be tasted in the dough, hayevet bechala, the entire mixture is subject to the obligation of challah, because if the flavor of the tevel sourdough can be tasted in the mixture, we say tam ki ikar, and the entire mixture becomes subject to challah, even though most of the dough is not subject to challah. Vimla, but if the flavor of the wheat grain cannot be tasted in the dough, pitura, it's exempt from challah. The sourdough is nullified in the majority of chulin rice dough, and there is no requirement at all to separate challah. Now we learned in Mishnah 8, that when tevel sourdough is placed into chulin dough, the entire dough becomes forbidden, no matter how little tevel the mixture contains. So the Mishnah now is going to say, what's the difference with that case and with the case we just said right now? So Mishnah says, Im ken, if it's so, like we just said, that the tevel sourdough forbids the rice dough, only if the flavor of the sourdough can be tasted. Lama amru tevel osel kolshu. Regarding what case of the sages say that tevel forbids a mixture even in the smallest amount, even if it cannot be tasted. So the Mishnah says, min bimino. They said regarding a mixture of food of one kind with its own kind, like in the case of Mishnah 8, where both the sourdough and dough are made of wheat. In that case, the mixture is prohibited even if the tevel cannot be tasted. But v'shelo b'mino b'noten tam. Regarding a mixture of food of one kind with another kind, meaning different, like in our case where we have wheat and rice, b'noten tam. The law is that tevel prohibits only when it gives taste to the mixture. Now the Gemara Masechet Avodah Zarah, page 73b, explains, Midoraita, under biblical law, even a single kernel of grain may be separated as tiruma, no matter how much grain there is in the pile. The requirement to separate approximately 1/50th, 2% is midrabanan, rabbinic. But midoraita, even a single kernel of grain can be separated no matter how much grain is in the pile. Therefore, the rabbis decreed, just as a single kernel of grain may be separated as tiruma, so too a single kernel of tevel is significant enough to make an entire pile of chunin forbidden. But this applies, however, only if the tevel and chunin are of the same species of produce, min b'mino, because since one species cannot be designated as tiruma for a different species, like we learned in Masechet Tirumot, chapter 2, Mishnah 4, tevel of a different species does not prohibit the mixture if it is the minority, and it doesn't give over flavor. That is the Rabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.